So I want to clarify how to use this section command. I think that it's important to just think about the logic and the way that Rhino wants us to be conceptualizing the sections that we're taking. So if we want to take a section, we know that sections can be horizontal. Horizontal sections are simply plans, or it can be vertical. We're working on these vertical sections right now in the assignment. Let's go ahead and use two views right now to kind of navigate through the model and these steps. I'm going to want you to be in a perspective view as well as a top view, and that'll give us access to sort of all the information that we need. The first thing that I want you to do is to determine the optimum orientation of your section. So when we look around and in this kind of shaded view, I can see that I have objects within the building that are oriented in several different planes or orientations. For my project, for this particular little project, that the bulk of the objects that have kind of similar orientation or the same orientation belong to both the gridded frame as well as the roof structure. The first thing to do is to orient your construction plane to one of those objects. Let's start off in a neutral condition where the orientation is in the world view. So I have my construction plane over here, but I want to create a construction plane that is parallel to one of those objects. So I have my C plane commands. I have several sort of shortcuts, but if we just go to the general C plane, we can see all of the options that we have for setting up a C plane. And I'm going to want to set up my C plane in a relationship to a surface plane. I'm going to go ahead, this one, there's no interference behind this one, so I'm going to go ahead and set that up. And I'm going to pick this surface. And if I zoom out now, if I change my view angle, that it has set itself up along this piece of structure that I was referencing. And now everything else that I do can be done on that construction plane. And I'm going to want to create a clipping plane for my section, as well as a rectangle that's going to help me orient my camera. And I can just create a clipping plane, and that clipping plane has jumped to my construction plane, right? That's not surprising. We can see that it's sitting right there on that piece of structure. That's not necessarily where I want the section, but the first thing I'm going to do is also create a rectangle, and I can keep those two objects together. I'll tell you why you want to do that in a minute. But let's go ahead and create a rectangle, and then I want to drop a planar surface into that rectangle. So let's select both the rectangle and the clipping plane and move those together so that we can begin to see some options for our section. You can see I'm kind of moving through in still in a perspective view, but I'm moving through and I'm beginning to get these different views of the model, and I can begin to select the conditions for the section that I want. That's a kind of boring section, but now I've gotten into the hole at the glass. I just went through a column, and you can see why we don't actually want to cut at the structure itself. I've got this gridded frame that's showing, and so it's giving me the impression that everything is sort of boxed into little rooms, and that's really not what's going on in this building. So let's keep moving. I've got the hole indicated. Now I'm moving through parts of section. Here we go, we're going through that cage, and I kind of like that view of the cage. The other thing that's happening here is I'm getting the section through this cut part of the roof, and that's going to be nice when we sort of add the perspective to it. So let's say that that's the kind of condition of the section that I want. Now I want to set up an orthographic view. I've been in this perspective view, but I'm going to set a camera to this plane, this rectangle and surface that I created in order to get a new orthographic view. So if we go to our set view commands, I can either type in camera or I can choose one of these shortcuts. I've got a camera with a plane, and that's the one I want. This is going to set a camera in relationship to a surface. Let's go ahead and choose that. I'm going to pick the surface, and you can see that the camera has now oriented itself very nicely to that surface. Because I was in a perspective view when I set the camera will still assume I want a perspective. But since we're trying to cut a section, we want a parallel projection. So to change that, I can simply click on the view, which will take me to my viewport properties. And I see that it's a perspective. I can simply there change it to parallel, and now that view will be redefined the camera will be redefined in a parallel projection. Now, it's not very accurate to call this perspective now, so let's name this view. When I want to name a new view, I want to be in this panel here. We could type in name view, but we can also, if we're in the named view panel, just add a new view. And I'm going to call this right section. And I'm going to call it right section ortho. Now that I've saved that view, if I do something and start to get out of my correct orientation, I can simply go back to my named views and double click to get back to my ortho, my preferred ortho view. The other thing that I've done is turn on my camera. You do this simply by typing in the camera command, and you can see that you can hide, show, or toggle your camera. So I have it visible right now. Let's cancel that. And if I want to see my camera, I can't see the camera from the view I'm in. I essentially am the camera in that view. But if I go to the top view, I can see this cone, which shows me the point where my camera is located and also the plane of projection for that camera. I want to keep that plane of projection the same, but change the camera's behavior from a parallel view to a perspective view in a copy of the view. So let's go ahead and do that. So I've got my right section ortho. I'm going to duplicate that named view, and I'm going to rename that duplicate, and I'm going to call it, instead of ortho, I'm going to call it perspective. Okay, so I've got this, it's this view, it's not applied to anything. Let's apply it to this second window. Let me change also the viewing style to be that ghosted view. So now I can see when I move in that I have a copy, an exact copy. But what do I want? I want to change it to perspective. And now when I'm zooming in, I can begin to see these kind of more idealized spatial views of the interior. When I zoom in here, it remains flat. When I zoom in here, I can begin to really see in perspective some of these spaces. Depending on how I scroll in, I'm going to get different perspectives. I can scroll toward the top and get a perspective that's much closer to the top of the building. You can see I'm almost getting on top of the roof at this point. My floors are below me. I can scroll in the bottom, and now I'm definitely down in these lower levels. I'm now on first floor. Maybe if I scroll here, I'm going to get to the second floor. I've got my floor and my ceiling. So just by scrolling, and you definitely don't want to rotate the camera, but just by scrolling, I can change which space I'm in or how close or far I am from different planes. Since I'm taking a section of the interior, I'm going to zoom sort of somewhere toward the middle, and I may even at this point redefine that camera and that view, and it will say, do you want to replace it? I'm going to say yes. So now if I cut a section and make 2D, I can combine those two drawings into the section perspective. And those are two separate drawings. I suppose I could make one drawing and then amplify the section here, but we may want to, for other reasons, have those drawings, two separate drawings. So I hope you have already started to play with the section command. Again, we've been doing our sections really with Make 2D, but there's some nice features to using the section command instead. It's a little tricky to learn the logic, so let's just go ahead with that. Again, for these steps, I want you to be in two views. We did save this perspective, right section perspective, which we're going to use later on for our section perspective. Let's go ahead and change this view, though, to be the top view. So there's a certain logic to using this section command, and these are the important steps. First, you want to show it the direction of your section. In this case, I want to be cutting a section essentially in this type of a view. And because of my construction plane and my camera, it is oriented toward the object in the way that I want. So first it wants to know, where are we going to show you this section? What kind of view are we interested in getting the section of? The second piece of information is going to be, what do you want to cut in section? In my case, it'll be the site and the building. And the third piece of information is, how do you want to slice through this object? I think I need to make one more piece of information to make this as easy as possible. Right now we've got my clipping plane. I can make that a little bit larger, but I think as I show it how I want to cut, it would be very helpful to have a line. And I'm going to just go ahead and draw a line that reaches from one end of my clipping plane to the other end of my clipping plane. And that way I can be sure that I'm sort of grabbing the right direction for this cutting action. Okay, so first, I'm in my right side view. Second, I'm going to type the section command. And if I don't have any objects selected, it will ask me at this time for these objects. Once I have the objects selected, I hit enter, and then it wants to know the start of the section. Again, confirming that I am actively on this right ortho side, I'm going to actually indicate the direction of the cut in the plan view. And you can see that you can imagine if what I'm going to show it is sort of the knife line, this is kind of the view where I want to use this to cut through it like it's a piece of cake. So let's click one end of that line and the other end of that line. And if I am satisfied with that, and we should test it, I'm going to say done. Now, when I move, the section is now actively selected. And so when I move it sideways, that thing which it has called the section was actively selected. Somehow I did get this little plane in there, but I can easily get rid of it. But that's my section. And so if you have things done kind of in the correct order, it's not hard at all to do. And I can imagine a really robust kind of activity where you cut multiple sections through a building and really begin to get kind of a rich set of sequential sections. I'm gonna try that now and just show you what that would look like. So to do that little activity, I set a number of lines that were spaced at a distance of 12 feet, just sort of out of curiosity. And I used the section command for each one of those lines. And this was the result. I think it's kind of interesting. It's a little complex, but from certain angles, I can definitely see how the sections line up. And you could do some kind of clever things, I think, by, maybe changing the line weights as the sections progress through space. Or maybe if they're a little closer together, we might read the sort of shape of the spaces a little bit better. It probably works best right when they're lined up, but I can imagine some uses for this. It's kind of interesting, but it's a little complicated in the middle there. I don't think they read particularly well. But if we went back and post-shade these, I think it could read really well and could be pretty interesting. I think because I've cut through the stairs in some places, it doesn't read quite as well as I would like. But anyway, worth an exercise.